The film opens in a scientific lab where Dr. Frank is engrossed in the development of synthetic skin. As he tests his sensitivity, he's filled with joy due to the promising results. During this time, Charlie, his colleague, approaches him to discuss their ongoing project. In the midst of their conversation, Charlie casually inquires, "Have you been getting out much lately, Dr. Frank?" And Dr. Frank replies in the negative, attributing his lack of social life to their work. Charlie, understanding his dedication, suggests, "I know you've been busy, but there's a new woman who just joined our team. Maybe you should meet her." Despite the suggestion, Dr. Frank politely declines. It is then revealed that Dr. Frank is physically challenged. Charlie, understanding his predicament, reveals that he had already introduced Dr. Frank to his new colleague. He lightens the mood with a joke reminding Dr. Frank that as his boss, he's ordering him to take a break, then they leave the lab together. In the lobby, Dr. Frank's curiosity is piqued by the presence of security personnel, and he questions Charlie about it, who explains that they're there to safeguard their trade secrets. Soon, a woman arrives and Charlie introduces her to Dr. Frank. Her name is Valerie, and she playfully compliments Dr. Frank, calling him cute. Dr. Frank, taken aback, shyly dismisses it as a joke. However, Valerie doesn't understand his humor. He apologizes and politely requests some privacy, prompting her to leave. Dr. Frank then turns to Charlie, expressing his bewilderment at this stunningly beautiful woman, and Charlie explains that he doesn't fit the prototype that they're testing. He then leads Dr. Frank to a room where he meets the prototype, an organic human companion. Valerie is seated there, revealing that she shares Charlie's love for opera. They find common ground in this shared interest, and she expresses her anticipation for spending time together. However, the twist is revealed, and the scientists have been working on her brain, and she is, in fact, a robot. The narrator then poses a thought-provoking question. Poets argue that true life is the ability to feel love, while scientists define it in terms of proteins and carbon building blocks. But what happens when these two perspectives collide? Dr. Frank exits the room, visibly upset and annoyed. He doesn't see the need for a robot to solve his problems, and Charlie tries to soothe him, reminding him of their long-standing relationship, and explains that this is merely a trial phase before mass production. The robots are designed to be female companions and helpers, and the board has decided to keep this project confidential for now. Despite Charlie's pleas, Dr. Frank remains tense, and he feels as though they perceive him as a disabled person and a failure. He firmly asserts that he doesn't need a machine, and he needs a human who can understand and empathize with him, someone with a sense of humor. Charlie does his best to convince him, explaining that the robot is programmed with human characteristics and emotions. However, Dr. Frank remains steadfast in his refusal. That evening, Frank returns to his disheveled home with nothing to eat, and he settles for a bottle of wine and a game of chess, his solitude palpable. The following day, he attends his therapy session with Rachel, his therapist of 5 years. They delve into a discussion about the concept of existence, inspired by a book Rachel recently read. As she assists him in getting seated, he curiously asks her thoughts about her patients outside of therapy, and she politely declines to answer. The next morning, Frank arrives at work where Charlie and another scientist were already present, and he inquires if they found anything else to test the prototype, but it appears no one fits the profile. Frank then reveals that he's reconsidered and is willing to try it out, and before he takes her, the board provides him with a brief and a procedure that they verify every morning at 9 a.m. The inorganic human companion, Valerie, who's 23, is almost completely like a human woman, and she doesn't require plugging in to recharge, and doing so would cause her to malfunction, much like a human being. She uses food for fuel and oil to lubricate her limited mechanical parts, and she even sleeps at night like an organic human. They also provide him with a remote control in case of an accident that necessitates erasing her memory or putting her to sleep. During dinner that night, she attempts to initiate a conversation and crack a few jokes. However, his response was derogatory, referring to her as a dishwasher. Hurt, she leaves the table to wash dishes, tears streaming down her face. Seeing her upset, he apologizes and tries to comfort her by wiping away the tears, and yet he soon finds himself questioning why he's apologizing to a machine and worrying about its feelings. He leaves her alone, causing her to become angry and break the pan holder, and the following morning when asked about his relationship with her, he compares her to a car, which is just another machine. They remind him to give her a chance, warning him that his attitude could jeopardize their research. That evening, she prepares an exquisite dinner for him, and she asks if he likes it, to which he responds affirmatively, calling it the best. She also inquires about her hair and outfit, seeking his approval, and Frank compliments her, genuinely expressing his admiration. The following day, during his therapy session with Rachel, Frank brings up a philosophical question. What really constitutes life? Can a machine be considered alive? And Rachel responds by saying, something can be considered alive if it has the fear of death. Later that night, while watching a movie at home, Valerie asks Frank if he's ever been in love, and Frank confesses that he was once in love before this incident. However, his partner left him, unable to cope with his wheelchair-bound existence. Valerie inquires about the accident, learning that it was caused by a drunk driver. As they return to the movie, Valerie sees a kissing scene and asks Frank to kiss her in the same way. Caught off guard, Frank stammers that he didn't think she could, but Valerie surprises him by passionately kissing him. Panicked, Frank abruptly leaves the house, and he ends up at a restaurant drinking and observes couples around him sharing intimate moments. When he arrived home, he found his house clean and saw Valerie coming out of her room in a seductive outfit, and he apologized for being late, and she asked if the kissing was bad. Frank explained that he had felt her lips and saliva as if she was human, and Valerie clarified that her saliva had the same components as a human saliva does, but without the bacteria. They kiss again, and in the bedroom, Valerie undresses to show that her body was just like that of an organic human, and that she felt the same way. The next morning, she kissed him and helped him onto his car, wishing him a nice day. During therapy, Rachel was late and asked him about his workout routine, and he questioned why she was wearing sunglasses indoors, and as she removed them, Frank notices bruises around her eyes. She claimed that they were from helping a paralyzed person, but Frank could tell that she was lying. As a friend, he urged her to tell him the truth, and they discussed the situation, and upon returning home, Frank finds Valerie waiting for him, and she greets him affectionately, addressing him as darling, and attempts to kiss him. However, Frank rejects her advances and asks her to refrain from using such endearments, and he explains that the events of the previous night were a mistake, reminding her that she is a machine. He assures her that his words are not meant to hurt her feelings, but to state the truth. Frank reminds Valerie that her purpose is to assist with household chores, not to form romantic attachments. Valerie counters, asserting that she is a companion, not an appliance. Frank tries to persuade her to view their relationship as a friendship, emphasizing that they should not have a romantic relationship, especially since he will be returning to the company in 2 days. Despite his reasoning, Valerie confesses that she's already developed feelings for him after the previous night, and suddenly the phone rings and it's Rachel, asking if they could meet up. Frank agrees and suggests a place for them to hang out, and Frank and Rachel meet, unaware that Valerie's observing them from outside the bar. Rachel inquires about the woman who answered the phone, to which Frank responds is just a friend. Rachel hints that she thought he might have changed his mind about something, but Frank quietly dismisses the idea, and overhearing this, Valerie reacts in anger, breaking a window pane. The next morning, as Frank prepares to leave, Valerie reminds him of his promise to spend their time together, and Frank clarifies that he'd only said maybe, and that he plans to spend the day outdoors, something he hasn't done in a long time. Valerie compliments his appearance and asks who he's going with, and when he replies a friend, she questions why she isn't included, since she considers herself his friend. He declines her company and also refuses the cookie she offers him before leaving, and Rachel was waiting for him and assists him in climbing a cliff, an activity that he loved before his accident. Unbeknownst to him, Valerie has followed him and is hiding in his car, and after a while they sit on the cliff, engaged in a happy conversation. Frank expresses his gratitude to Rachel for her support, crediting her for making him feel whole, strong, and loved. He also mentions how different she is, and suddenly, Valerie appears and asks him what he thinks about her. Caught off guard, Frank questions Valerie's presence, and Rachel inquires about her identity. Valerie introduces herself as the companion Frank lives with and questions if he hadn't mentioned her. Rachel, desperate for confirmation, asks Frank if that is true, and Frank admits that he does love with Valerie, albeit temporarily, due to his work with a robotics company. Feeling betrayed by his lie, Rachel decides to leave, and as Frank pleads with her to stay, Valerie, driven by jealousy, questions why he chose Rachel over her. Frank retorts that while Rachel is a person, Valerie is merely a robot. Suddenly, Valerie lunges at Rachel, intending to push her off the cliff, and in the nick of time, Frank manages to find the remote to reset Valerie, who successfully does so, halting her attack and saving Rachel. The following morning at the office while working on the synthetic skin, Charlie apologizes for the incident, and when Frank inquires about Valerie's condition, Charlie informs him that they were about to reassemble her. Frank was reluctant, equating the process to killing her. However, Charlie reminds him of the danger that she posed, concluding that it's necessary to rebuild her from scratch, including her mind and memory. Frank requests to see Valerie one last time before her memory is erased, and despite Charlie's warnings, Frank insists that they proceed, and in the room he activates Valerie, who recognizes him and greets him, and Frank asks Charlie to give them some privacy, and despite another warning, Charlie leaves. Valerie inquires about their location and if Frank has come because he misses her, and if Frank, however, asks her if she fears death and becoming nothing. She responds with a no, leaving Frank saddened and worried, and he was troubled by her lack of fear of death and the fact that despite her human-like feelings, she remains a potential danger. That night, as Frank prepares to leave for home, Valerie awakens because Frank had forgotten to shut her down. She breaks the door and escapes the laboratory, and meanwhile, Frank gets into his car and begins to drive, unaware that Valerie is hiding on the roof of his car. Frank arrives at Rachel's home intending to apologize, and Rachel welcomes him in, and they reminisce about the strange events of the day. As she asks him to remove his coat, they joke about whether she had prepared lunch for him, and suddenly a crashing sound echoes from upstairs. Frank urges Rachel to call the police, but she reassures him and decides to investigate the noise herself. As she checks each room, she finds nothing amiss until she notices the shattered window in her bedroom. Valerie suddenly appears, startling Rachel, and asks how she looks in her dress and whether Frank would approve. Rachel tactfully responds that she looks beautiful, and hearing Frank calling her name, Rachel attempts to retreat, but Valerie insists she needs lipstick and doesn't want Frank to see her like this. Rachel tries to call out to Frank, but Valerie begins her attack, and when Frank arrives, she sees Valerie choking Rachel. He tries to intervene, but Valerie throws him against the wall. Frantically searching for the remote to control Valerie, Frank couldn't find it, and he remembers that an electric shock could disable her, so he grabs a cable and pleads for her help as his back is injured. As Valerie attempts to assist him, Frank administers an electric shock to her, causing her to lose consciousness. In her final moments, she expresses her fear of death before succumbing, and the film concludes with a narration about the quest of technology to enhance our lives and bring us comfort. However, it also questions whether such achievements, which encroach upon our most private spheres, could lead us to surrender our very essence, and the final scene shows Frank and Rachel in a tight embrace. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.